there's been worldwide condemnation of the barbaric murder of a serving British soldier outside his barracks in South London. The Prime Minister has visited Woolwich today and paid his own tribute, and speaking to British Forces News, urged the military community to continue wearing their uniforms in public. A short while ago, the soldier was named as Drummer Lee Rigby of the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. He served at Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich as a recruiter, although his regiment is based in Cyprus. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Taylor, has just paid this tribute from Decalia.
We are all deeply saddened by the tragic events that led to the death of Drummer Lee Rigby yesterday afternoon in Woolwich. Lee was a dedicated and professional soldier, proud to wear the hackle and cap badge of his regiment. He was a real character within the 2nd Fusiliers. He was at the heart of our corps of drums and had taken part in many ceremonial events. But he was also an accomplished machine gunner who had served with distinction in Afghanistan, Germany and Cyprus. He was a natural choice to send recruiting with the recruiting group in London, where he inspired many young people to join the army. He will be sorely missed by the close-knit family that is the 2nd Fusiliers. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and friends at this tragic time, and our priority is to provide them with support wherever possible.
Lieutenant Colonel Jim Taylor speaking from Cyprus. The Defence Secretary Phillip Hammond also paid tribute to Drummer Rigby this afternoon.
Everyone in defence is shocked and saddened by the events of yesterday, which have led to the death of Drummer Lee Rigby of the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. This was a senseless murder of a soldier who's served the army faithfully in a variety of roles, including operational tours in Afghanistan, and our thoughts today are with his family and loved ones who are trying to come to terms with this terrible loss.
Phillip Hammond. Anti-terror police are hoping to question the two men shot and injured when they were confronted by police following the killing. It's been confirmed they were both known to security services. Our reporter Claire Sadler has spent the day at Westminster monitoring the reaction and response to yesterday's horrific incident.
Well, here at Westminster, a second COBRA meeting took place this morning, and that's where it was decided that an initial ban on military personnel wearing their uniforms outside of barracks should be overturned. It was decided that wasn't an appropriate response to this incident. More on that in a moment. But first, my colleague Cath Brazier has spent the day in Woolwich, where the barracks has formed a part of the fabric of the community for hundreds of years.
The shocking images are still hard to believe. The moments after a British soldier was run down and then savagely and repeatedly stabbed with a knife. All this in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses.
We're roughly 100 metres from where yesterday's tragic incident occurred, just up the road behind me here. It's clear that the barracks are a central part of this locality. They've been here 200 years and have become part of the local community. So the deep sense of shock from local residents is still being felt over 24 hours later.
To treat our soldiers that have fought for us in that manner is just unthinkable. Disgusting. I just can't even put it into words. You know, you think when your son comes home that he's going to be safe.
At the front gate, flowers, cards and other tributes quickly built up. On this occasion, no one minding that traffic was slow as passers-by got out of their cars to pay their respects. The Prime Minister David Cameron was among them, meeting troops here at Woolwich Barracks. And earlier, London Mayor Boris Johnson also visited the area. Local officers showed him around the crime scene.
This is not a question now of blaming the religion of Islam. It is certainly not a question of blaming any aspect of British foreign policy or what British air troops are due in operations abroad when they risk our lives on behalf of all of us.
The Mayor went on to praise the emergency services for their continuing efforts. The Met Police has confirmed that an extra 1,200 staff are on duty in the capital today. It's thought the two suspects were already known to security services, but whether they acted alone or as part of a wider movement, fears of an anti-Muslim backlash have begun.
This is not the way forward. This is not the way to do it. If you're angry about a British foreign policy, do it the right way. Do it democratically. Get in touch with your MP. Join a political party. Go on a march. Don't attack an innocent man and kill him.
Woolwich certainly had something of an eerie feel about it today. Subdued but quietly angry. The reaction, though, to this brutal murder of a serving British soldier has been loud and heartfelt. All day, the victim and his family were in people's thoughts, and support for the armed forces on their lips. Cath Brazier, Forces News, Woolwich.
While speaking outside Downing Street earlier, David Cameron warned against a knee-jerk reaction to this incident. And when I interviewed the Prime Minister for British Forces News, I asked him what his message was for military personnel.
Well, my message is that they have all our support, the good wishes of the whole country. They're a vital part of our country and rightly revered for the work they do at home and abroad. All our thoughts and prayers are with the family of the individual who was so brutally murdered on the streets of London. They have our thoughts, our prayers, our good wishes as they mourn the loss of their loved one, and the nation has lost a very brave soldier.
Personnel have been told they can wear their uniforms outside barracks. How important is it for them to be seen in uniform, and how do they go about protecting themselves?
One of the ways we will defeat terror and violent extremism and all forms of terrorism is going about our ordinary everyday lives and not changing the things that we do. The British public love our armed forces. They love them being in the public eye. They want to see them in their uniforms going about their everyday lives, whether they're taking their children to school or doing the weekly shop in the supermarket. And our armed forces feel like that too. Obviously it was right when this dreadful event took place for some guidance to be issued, not knowing exactly what had happened. But I think now it's right to say we're proud of our armed forces. They're proud to wear their uniforms. We're proud to see them in public in their uniforms. And the more that we show that everyday life will continue, the more that we'll win.
Well, nevertheless, military personnel have been told to take sensible security precautions when they go out. But we have heard stories from around the country of personnel being told not to wear their uniforms when they're travelling, especially into central London. The military have enjoyed a high profile in recent years. They're a very visible presence at the London Olympics, and homecoming parades are always well supported. It's a far cry from the anonymity of the 70s and 80s, when the IRA was seen as a real threat.
I remember the bad days of the IRA's campaign when we effectively withdrew to barracks, and obviously with the end of that campaign we've gone out more into the community and worn our uniforms with pride. And whilst we don't know whether this serviceman was wearing his uniform at the time, it seems unlikely. He could clearly readily identify a fibre as a soldier, and we take great pride from the support we get from the British public when out and about. But I think it's inevitable that there will be a review of security at a time like this, and people will be looking at the procedures and rules that are in place. However, I personally hope that we don't see another withdrawal to barracks as we saw last time.
In the immediate aftermath of the attack in Woolwich, personnel were told not to wear their uniforms in public. But this morning that was overturned. It was decided it wouldn't be the right response. But security has been stepped up at London's barracks, and personnel have been advised not to go out alone.
I think it reminds us how vulnerable we all are, but it also reminds us by the response of the public that we are not going to be cowed by this kind of terrorist action.
Although this is the first incident of its kind, there have been threats against British forces at home before. In 2007, a Birmingham man was arrested for wanting to kidnap and behead a British soldier. More recently, 3 men were jailed after considering attacking Wootton Bassett.
I think the challenge with individuals like this is that it's uncertain how, whether these individuals would have thrown up the sort of red flags that security services would have acted on preemptively. It is possible that these individuals will look from an intelligence perspective like an awful lot of other people, and so then identifying why this person decides to do something versus that person not is a very difficult equation.
While those in defence will undoubtedly be shocked by these events, a spokesman for the Ministry of Defence says the best way we can defeat terrorism is to carry on as normal. Well, let's hear now from Chief of the Defence Staff, General Sir David Richards, who's been giving his reaction to the attack and the implications for the armed forces.
I mean, our first thoughts inevitably are with the soldiers' family and close friends, and you know, it's always a tragedy. It's particularly poignant that it happened on the streets of this capital city of ours, but there's where our first thoughts lie. At the same time, I think, secondly, reflecting the very high morale of those of us in the armed forces, we're absolutely determined not to be intimidated into not doing the right thing, whether it's here in this country or in Afghanistan or wherever we seek to serve the nation. So it hasn't affected us in a direct sense. If anything, it's reinforced our desire and determination to do the right thing.
What about people who will be saying, especially perhaps families of those who are serving, on security, personal security, but also security at bases across the country?
Well, I mean, this was outside of base, and I'm very confident that base security is as tight as it's ever been, and necessarily so. It's a very difficult balancing act. We are very proud of the uniform we wear. We have huge support around the country. I think this is a completely isolated incident, and we'll wait to hear more on that, but that is our view. And so my judgment, and I know it's shared by no one less than the Prime Minister, is that we, having reviewed the decision taken yesterday, we now know enough to put our uniforms back on, always using common sense to decide whether it is secure or not. And it's not necessarily terrorism, it's you don't want to get caught up, you know, with drunks or something like that. So we've always used common sense on these occasions. We'll continue to use it, but there's no reason at all why we shouldn't wear our uniforms with pride, but on a common sense basis.
Chief of the Defence Staff, General Sir David Richards there. Well, we will leave the last word to former Security Minister and First Sea Lord, Admiral Lord West. I spoke to him earlier and asked him about his reaction upon hearing the news of the attack.
Well, I was shocked. It's a particularly nasty and bloody attack. But I think people in this country forget that we do have a relatively high threat level all the time. You know, that an attack is likely. And we forget that sometimes. The agencies don't, the SO15 don't, you know, all of those in power don't, because we're constantly monitoring people and indeed bringing people to justice who are thinking of doing an attack. But for an attack to happen, obviously it's always a horrible shock.
So do you think this kind of attack could have been foreseen?
Very difficult, and I think one of the things they'll be looking at now, all the agencies, had these people popped above their radar horizon before, all the things at the moment make it look as though it's a one-off, which means they're probably clean skins, possibly, never been spotted maybe, self-radicalised, consequently very, very difficult to actually spot these things until they do something.
And how difficult is it to guard against this kind of attack?
It's extremely difficult to guard against this, because if they are self-starters, if they've self-radicalised, you know, rather like someone watching pornography in their back bedroom, they're watching this in their back bedroom, until they come out and do something, we have no indication of it. Therefore, it's very, very difficult. And the only way to get at it is either to, well, really the best way of getting at it is to try and stop that radicalisation. And we've done a lot of work on that, but to get on the web, to put out a different message, to actually rot up their radicalisation, to make sure the imams and all of the community are putting out the right message, all of those things. But it takes a long time and a lot of work, and we're working at it. That's the best way of doing it. The other thing is, of course, preventative things where, you know, all of us need to be more aware of what's going on around us. We need to be careful, more careful, maybe take different routes. You know, before one steps out from a barracks, even in plain clothes, just have a check around, is everyone here, you know, what's going on. You know, those sort of normal precautions that we got very used to during the time of the IRA, of course.